Hi, everyone, and welcome to our last panel today. And I'm Sylvester, a partner at Sentinal Global. We are an institutional venture fund backed by sovereign wealth funds and large asset allocators. And we invest in the next generation of financial technology and enterprise technology. And I'm personally excited to see the intersection when two of the most transformative technologies, AI and Web3, collide. So there's been a huge surge at this intersection from decentralized compute to AI agent economies, and today we'll unpack whether this is just hype or whether there's substance beneath the surface. So we've gathered a great panel for this, and I'll ask everyone to introduce themselves. So maybe we'll start with Mohamed.
Yeah, how you guys doing? So I'm Mohamed. I do research at Messari. I cover a lot of the technical projects, AI and so forth. My background's in AI engineering. I've worked in that domain in both aerospace and hedge funds, and today we're here talking about some of the intersections, so let's get into it.
Hi, everyone. I'm Milica. I'm a newly added to this panel, so thus the technical difficulties here. Oh, here I am. Yay. So I am an AI engineering consultant at Google. I work with large Google customers building AI systems for them.
And I'm Brian Jacobs. I'm currently with DataBricks. 5 weeks ago, I was with Google. I've been lucky enough for the last 4 years to work somewhat at the intersection that Sylvester mentioned. There's a covert Web3 operation going on at Google that I led globally, and now I'm more in enterprise AI and look forward to talking about the tangible intersection between the two. And it's not hype, it's real.
That's great to hear. And so maybe we'll dive right in. And to start off, I have a couple of questions which will be directed to you based on your background, your expertise. And maybe the first question to Mohamed. We've seen a 9 billion plus market cap emerge around AI-related crypto tokens. So from your vantage point at Messari, what's driving this surge of interest? And is the convergence real, or are we living in buzzword land?
That's an excellent question with many layers, but ultimately, in my perspective, it's just a lot of venture capital firms or investment firms are trying to look for AI investments that they missed out on in Web 2, so they're coming to Web 3 looking for similar investments and returns. However, in such an environment, you do find that there are some good companies that may come out of the nonsense. And in my perspective, I've seen hundreds of AI companies. I have an understanding of how they work on the technical front. Only one or two are of any kind of value or long-term accrual that would bring any changes to the space. So in short form, there is quite a bit of hype, and there has to be very diligent analysis of not only the projects themselves, but the team and the technicals, because you can fall into this facade where if you don't understand the technicals very well, any team could come and trick you and say, hey, we're working on something amazing on the AI revolutionary front. But in reality, nothing really is there. So that's a very, very important topic to kind of focus on. Are the technicals real, and are the teams behind them real?
Right, and it's one thing to ask whether the technicals are real, and it's another, to get mainstream adoption, and people have always been talking about enterprise adoption. So maybe the next question will be for Milica, right? Today's AI models are really hungry for compute, and we have the big clouds, as we know, they currently dominate the access. The key question then is, can decentralized GPU networks or compute marketplaces like Jensen or Render meaningfully challenge this?
Probably in a long term, yes, but I think that a problem is, again, adoption and education is going to be a big one, and also how do you integrate that with an existing stack. So if you are thinking about operationalizing something for like a large scale, depending how many users you have, probably it's going to come down to your use case and the industry you're in. Probably we're looking into more like specialized industries, regulated industries. If you're worried about security, privacy, that might be a little bit adoption might be greater there. But in general, for your average small to mid-market company, where it's going to come down to ease of integration, ease of maintainability, and cost. So it's probably more likely that you're first looking to specialized industries than kind of like a massive adoption.
One point to add to that, if you look at a lot of the decentralized compute providers in the decentralized space, a lot of them have been around for quite some time, and they haven't brought about any traction.
Right.
And that's simply because there is no need. If you're like at OpenAI, right, you have an infinite tap to capital that you could build all your centralized compute that you would ever need. However, as things progress in time and the overall AI bubble pops and you no longer have a consistent stream of capital to fuel the compute, then these people will emerge and say, hey, we have a product, it's cheaper, it's better. And in that case, only in that case, after the bubble pops, do they have like a potential for success.
But I do think in general this is going to be hard to happen. DataBricks, for example, like if you look at DataBricks in Google Cloud, it's a very particular type of customer. So DataBricks, it's going to be clients that enterprise customers that are looking for that everything goes and data heavy, a compute like a data pre-processing and data pre-processing heavy. With Google, you come with, if you're building everything on Google Cloud, GCP. You're probably looking for that. So it's also like this ease, the package, everything needs to be packaged perfectly. Mm-hmm. So if you're not competing on cost, it's going to be really hard to compete.
Right.
Like, what do you offer?
And then, Brian, I think a good follow-up is based on what both of them have said. What would it take then, for decentralized compute to be viable in an enterprise setting, right? From a performance, scalability, and cost standpoint.
I thought I got the softballs, but this doesn't feel like one. I would say this. I think what you're going to find is, especially at the enterprise and kind of the distributed layer, that things will come somewhat full circle. Milica's right. Google, DataBricks, et cetera, we all have our niches. But I think if anyone's familiar with Javion's paradox, he was a long since dead UK economist. He said, as the marginal cost, believe it or not, goes down, demand and use will go up. So where am I going? I'm telling you that I do believe that the most valuable assets for enterprises, for small entities, for the 1 million one-person companies that are starting and going to be started because of AI, will actually be something that is very much at the edge, that is a weave of GPUs, TPUs, other things that Google has invented, and other kind of distributed mechanisms where, yes, the benefits of the cloud and shared services and shared OS and all that stuff will be there, but that the single most important asset that'll be valued on a balance sheet will be this IP that is highly grounded in your specific or customer-specific data, probably provided by DataBricks, and then constantly refined with pipelines and other types of data sources that will be fed by you and different bespoke ecosystems. So I think that's how it's possible, and I would just go, I remember where I was when DeepSeek hit. I was in the Google gym working out, and I tried to download it, and I wasn't allowed. And I know there's some conjecture on, like, did they really innovate, did they not? I mean, I would not underestimate people's ability to innovate around the infrastructure and make these chips, what was it, like just a year ago, we had 16,000 GPUs as the largest cluster, and now we're at, 200,000. So as long as people keep wanting it, which I feel like everybody does, and as long as people don't get too afraid of it, and I do think we will get better on transparency, this thing is really going to continue to go, and I do believe it is an ultimate democratizing movement. This Web3, and we kind of have like the Industrial Revolution and Bretton Woods happening at the same time. Bretton Woods on the crypto and liquidity and capital formation side, and Industrial Revolution on productivity. I think that's incredibly exciting.
Yeah, that's a great perspective, and I think you and Milica already are starting to touch on that, especially on, you said, transparency and data ownership, there's privacy. AI is built on data, And Web3's ethos is built on data ownership and privacy. So I think the next follow-up question, which is open to all of you, is how might blockchain-based infrastructure help users gain more control, improve data integrity, and preserve privacy in the age of AI?
Mohamed?
So if you look at a lot of the existing projects in the decentralized data space, at least, you're seeing a lot of traction simply because there's a simple reward mechanism for your data. People only care about the potential return they could get from using an app or a service. And in the decentralized space, it's very easy to come and say, I'm going to give you X number of tokens for your data over time. So that's probably the most important element of this whole structure, is that you've kind of bridged the gap between reward and the value of your data. You're not just signing away and giving Google away your data for free, right? You're actually getting a piece of the return. But the issue then lies is once you have that data, right? If there's a company like Grass or Cled or many others that are collecting this data, how do they get the data and then transfer it to people that want to buy it? Now that's where there's an infrastructure requirement that is still needing to be built out and solved.
I think on one of the previous panels, someone mentioned that essentially everything that happens in the background, if you can make it so that it doesn't matter to a final user, consumer, whoever that is, even if like enterprise or consumer-based products, if you make it so it doesn't matter, so that essentially the only people who care whether that's Web3 based or whatever tech it is, it doesn't matter. That essentially it's only going to matter from the product building perspective, and again, then it's going to come down to cost, maintainability, so use. It's not going to matter to the front. I can't see the world where we're going to talk to millions of consumers out there if we're talking about individual consumer products, and they're going to be like, oh, I really care that this was built on blockchain. Nobody cares. Nobody cares, and there's no way that anyone will care. Otherwise, the blockchain adoption would have been massive already, and it's the opposite. So.
No, I 100% agree with that sentiment. A lot of blockchain companies in general, if you look at News or Pluralis or so on, they're great companies solving great problems. However, people don't care about the philosophy, right? I don't care that it's decentralized. I don't care so and so. Can I use it and is it cheap? Is the ultimate question and answer right there. So very, very good point. Yeah.
Yeah, I agree wholeheartedly. I'll tell you a quick story. In the convergence somewhat of Web3 and agentic agents, you have an ability now for a shop owner to basically have a customer pay in real time in 1 second and basically pay for less than a penny, not 3%, not 2% to some of these card networks. And they have no idea what's going on behind the scenes. They just know that they get paid and settled in real time and don't have to pay that egregious fee and get all sorts of loyalty, and there's just so many accretive elements that are passed on, to the consumer. The other thing I will say is, as these swarms of agents, and I'm seeing it across enterprises today, are deployed, immutability of identity and all of these types of things that are going to enable human in the loop is going to be critical. So you will see these two worlds absolutely converging. And to Milica's point, I don't want anybody to know what's going on under the covers. The best technology is the technology you have no idea exists. You just use it. It helps you execute your task or improve your welfare. And I know I'm getting on my soapbox a little bit, but that's what's happening. So these aren't parallel streams anymore. They're together, and they're going to continue to come together.
I do want to add one thing. I do think that there exists a market or industries where this matters. So when you're thinking about, for example, building on edge, this is definitely getting popular. Mm-hmm. And when you're thinking about, large language models, there are startups now that are coming up with, models that are specifically built to be deployed on edge. And there is a huge market for it, but it's very specialized. We're talking about defense industry, some healthcare, FSIs, but even FSI industry is going to be really certain parts of FSIs, right? Not everything. So it's out there, but in regular consumer, you are selling data, right? Yeah. So there is a philosophy there that we are actually want to get paid to sell our own data. So nobody cares.
Right. So then, from an enterprise standpoint, do you see institutions ever trusting decentralized data infra for AI use cases then? And if so, like what would need to happen for that to be true?
I'll go first. I think it's going to take a little time on that one. I do think just as digital natives really accelerated the distribution of the internet and people that grew up with it used it more and solved all sorts of use cases that we never thought were possible 25 years ago, I think the expectation of the next, I don't think, I know, of the next generation is that we are operating in zero knowledge proofs and immutability and all sorts of democratized functions that, yes, I think will serve as a catalyst for networks and that we'll call it like enterprises and non-enterprises to work together over some sort of shared trusted protocol, blockchain. But that's going to take a while. That's like a human condition that has to change. We probably might need a generation to retire before that happens. But if and when it does happen, I think we're going to be much better for it. Think about all of the different new interactions that can happen that don't happen today, that will ultimately drive more efficiency, new capabilities, new business opportunities, et cetera.
I think the previous panel was a spot-on one of the best use cases for Web3 AI intersection, like in gaming, in general, like generation, like generating characters, for example. There are a bunch of startups that are like literally generating characters for video games where you can plug in and whatever. I think on the enterprise side, probably Coinbase is going to be the best example because they're the mass adopted, right? Maybe Robinhood, it's those type of examples might be the best when it comes to mass adoption with Web3 AI. I think for the longest time, it was a very hard question to how can you use AI in Web3 was also a question that was hard to answer. And it was like, you can kind of like the fraud detection was a big one, or now with LLMs generating content, sure. But it's also kind of like hard to connect. And now I heard a bunch of people are using agents for kind of automating everyday tasks. But the other way around, how do you plug in Web3 into AI? I think it again comes down to what's the problem that you're solving and why does this matter?
Yeah, and one last thing in terms of just the quickest potential adoption for AI is agents for the stablecoin realm. As we're all seeing, stablecoins are getting hotter and hotter by the day, right? And it's getting pushed within the government and so on and so forth. So if you have stablecoins and you're looking for the best yield, ultimately an agent could find the best yield across so many different decentralized providers and do so in a very efficient fashion. And if you translate that across the entire space, you'll begin to find that the ultimate use case for AI and crypto is agentic finance. And that is likely the future or at least the early stage future of AI and Web3 intersection.
But that's not a new use case, by the way, right? Agents have been existed for years and years and years. It's just the currently mainstream one.
Yeah.
Got it. And maybe before we move on, I know we have a few minutes left to some of your predictions. I want to open it up to the floor to see whether anyone has any questions for the panelists.
Go for it. Ask anything.
Hey, so my question is, how are each of your organizations evaluating the role of Web3 in AI, and where do you think the biggest opportunities are, and where do you need to kind of like mitigate risk?
Can you repeat the question?
So for each of your organizations, how are you evaluating the role of Web3 in AI, and where do you think the biggest opportunities are, and where do you think you might want to mitigate like risk or, yeah?
So within DataBricks, clearly it's coding and developers. 30 to 40% of basically what we do is we give our service away for free, and then we provide all sorts of managed services and things on that. So you've seen mass, and this is shown in Google and everywhere. So all of like I think the white collar knowledge work jobs, you're either getting automated or you're getting much better if you're elite at what you do. So I think internally, that's what's happening. I think externally, you're going to where you would think everything would start. You're in finance, you're in global currencies, you're in cash forecasting, like some of the use cases. These are all in production, supply chain, exogenous shock, tariff modeling, all these kinds of things. So I think there's a little bit of like some empirical data that's starting to emerge that these crazy, when the VIX spikes, you're not seeing huge, write-offs and earnings, or I just think about like the financial crisis of, you're probably too young, but like 15 years ago, it felt like the world was ending because we didn't have any of this hyperconnectivity. So I think you'll just continue to see these use cases that are much more done by automation or by data rather than people potentially emotionally reacting to them. Did that answer it?
I mean, from like a company perspective, I think in the research front, you're going to see heavy replacement, right? You're only going to need a few researchers relative to the numbers you would have traditionally. And simply because agents and AI in general are much more efficient in doing the preliminary research, and then a human will come in and look and make sure that that research is correct and validate the data. So in terms of Messari, we use AI heavily in our work. But I think that's a common trend across all research firms everywhere. And mitigating risk, I mean, you can't. It's a capitalistic environment. So if something's cheaper, you're always going to go for that, right? It's just simple game theory.
Yeah, I think we have another question.
Sure, thank you. This might be slightly orthogonal to the topics as well as the broad vibe of this conference in the crowd, but what are your thoughts on just decentralized ethos more broadly, and decentralized technologies, DLTs in particular, being utilized in a fashion to help address the AI alignment and AI safety problems? And Vitalik put out what was, at least in the AI safety community, a pretty highly regarded post like late 2023, and then I think a week or two ago, he came out with a part 2 to that, where he made the case for, he called himself a defensive accelerationist, which is deliberately a slight contradiction in terms. And I know this crowd is probably very accelerationist, but at least broadly speaking, yet it might be curious, your thoughts on, that some have talked about, of blockchain and decentralized technologies being a defensive technology within AI, like as a defensive accelerationist or simply a defensive technology because it's naturally de-risking, in terms of the potential problems, in the AI community and some of the debates you've seen on AI, dooming humanity, and there's some, papers from the AI community, and that's a big debate happening in that community. But what are your thoughts on blockchain being a potential, a way to address that? So, thank you.
Please. This is something I hold very dear to my heart. I worked in AI engineering for a few years before joining Messari, and I found it's like a very unethical space, right? And in all honesty, right, once you look at it, like if you have an ethical pursuit and you want to go the decentralized route, it's very difficult to win because you cannot compete with the lobbying firms that are going to come in and get a ton of money to pass whatever policies that are beneficial to the success of these centralized counterparts. So in theory, in like a philosophical sense, you could come and say, okay, decentralized AI solves the issue of data security, knowing how the model is being trained, and so on and so forth. But the only thing that matters is adoption. Does the everyday person care to use a decentralized model? I don't know. And we talked about this earlier. Most people simply look at blockchain and they don't really care. They don't have an incentive to use it over the traditional means. So decentralized AI in its future and being unethical, yes, in philosophy and theory, it sounds amazing, but in application, there are limitations as of now.
I think it matters on the use case that you're. So okay, let's just imagine this. So you have, and by the way, time paced me. Okay. So let's say that you're a huge healthcare company, like your hospital, Northwestern, doesn't matter. You're a big hospital chain, and you are working with your staffing. You have maybe, I don't know, doctors, nurses don't want to, they're working maybe now we have traveling nurses or traveling occupational therapists, and you want to figure out how to make an AI system to make certain prediction that is going to help you with your staffing. That is a very sensitive problem to solve, not just in terms of data, but you have to think about things like, let's say you make prediction for a small office that has 10 people. Even if you are anonymize it, and even if you're just kind of like making predictions to improve certain conditions in that office, based on 10 people for certain features, you can figure out who it is. So those are situations that someone somewhere might care, but in reality, security measures exist in those situations. So it's really only if we're talking about like mass consumers, individual companies in the US, regulations exist, and we are relatively as like whatever you're doing, your data is relatively well protected in terms of like financial industries or healthcare. Like HIPAA protects you, and you have control over that data. So we're really talking about like TikTok, Instagram. We're talking about like social media data or like data that you're giving up for free by using an app and agreeing to cookies. So it's a very consumer-based problem. And we found that consumers don't care. Like in general, consumers don't care. But if we're talking about like companies, like an enterprise world, security definitely exists, and it's not something that is taken lightly.
One small point to add to that, now that I think of it, I think there's a convergence with zero knowledge, right? The idea that you could have data, train your models on it, and never actually see the data. So once zero knowledge and AI in the decentralized fashion see some kind of convergence, that could be a potential huge use case, because it not only serves the decentralized world, but it could also serve the centralized world in that they could also use zero knowledge proofs to estimate the value of a data without ever seeing it, especially in cases like—
I think that's a great example.
Yeah, using medicine as an example.
Not just medicine, I mean—
everything.
Yeah.
I mean, you brought up medicine, so that's a very excellent case.
And keep an eye on quantum. I think if quantum comes full-fledged and is not, breaking 256-bit, encryption and all of the standards, then I think your idea becomes much more reality, and certainly what Mohamed is saying. So I watch that closely. I'm not smart enough to figure out qubits and things like that, but it's really interesting what the use cases could be.
Well, I think that's all the time we have for the last session. Thanks everyone.
Thank you all.